There is a question almost no one allows themselves to ask out loud, because it touches something very deep inside us. What if the reason nothing seems to be working in your life is not a lack of faith, nor a lack of effort, but the fact that you are fighting too hard? Think about this calmly, not as a criticism, but as an invitation to inner honesty. Because there is a kind of exhaustion that does not show up in the body, cannot be fixed with a good night's sleep, and does not improve with a vacation. It is soul-deep exhaustion, the kind that is born when you feel like you are always trying, insisting, pushing life toward a place that never quite arrives. Maybe you know this feeling well. You wake up with your mind already racing, thinking about what needs to be solved, what could go wrong, what is still missing before you can finally feel at peace. On the outside, everything looks normal. You meet your responsibilities, talk to people, keep moving forward. But inside, there is a constant tension, as if something is always out of place. Even when you stop, you do not truly rest. Your mind keeps fighting, planning, correcting, trying to control every detail. Many people have learned, consciously or not, that faith means constant effort, that trusting means pushing a little harder, that if something did not work out, it is because you did not try hard enough, pray hard enough, or push enough. And without realizing it, life turns into a permanent battlefield. You fight to succeed at work, fight to be loved, fight to feel secure, you even fight to feel spiritual. Everything becomes effort, everything becomes tension. But when we look more closely at the message of Jesus Christ, something begins to sound different. At no point did he call his disciples to fight against life. He did not promise absolute control, nor an existence without challenges. His invitation was always something else. It was to trust, to follow, to rest in him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, he said. It was not a call to carry more weight, but to find relief, not an invitation to fight, but to surrender. Perhaps the great mistake is believing that stopping the fight means giving up, as if letting go were a sign of weakness or abandonment. But what if it is exactly the opposite? What if stopping the fight is actually aligning yourself with something greater, wiser, and deeper than your constant need for control? What if the resistance you feel inside is not courage, but fear in disguise? This video is not about doing less out of laziness, nor about abandoning responsibility. It is about understanding something essential. There is a point where continuing to fight does not solve anything. It only exhausts you. And there is another point, almost invisible, where letting go begins to transform everything. To get there, we first need to understand where this almost automatic impulse to fight all the time comes from, as if it defined who we are. That is exactly what we are going to explore next. At some point in life, many people stop fighting for something and start fighting to feel like someone. The struggle stops being a response to specific challenges and becomes an identity. It is no longer about getting through a difficult season, but about existing in a constant state of effort. And this happens so quietly that almost no one notices when they cross that line. From an early age, society teaches that personal value comes from how hard you try, how much you can endure, how much you keep going even when everything feels heavy. Phrases like, "Don't give up," "Fight until the end," "Only those who persist win," are repeated as absolute truths. And in many contexts, they make sense. The problem begins when this logic invades every area of life and starts to define who you are. You are no longer just making an effort to achieve something. You feel guilty when you are not fighting. This shapes the mind and heart in deep ways. A person begins to see themselves as someone who must constantly prove their worth. Rest brings guilt. Pausing brings fear. Letting go brings anxiety. There is a constant sense that if you stop, everything will fall apart. And so, the struggle stops being a tool and becomes a permanent state of being. You are no longer fighting for something specific. You are fighting against life, against time, against your own emotions. In relationships, this shows up clearly. People fight to be seen, recognized, chosen. They try to please, adjust themselves, over-explain, as if love had to be earned by force. With money, the fight becomes constant anxiety, fear of not having enough, the need for absolute control over the future. With purpose, there is the feeling of always being behind, always owing something to life itself. Even in spirituality, the struggle appears when faith becomes pressure, prayer becomes obligation, and God becomes a goal to be reached. When Jesus Christ spoke about the heavy burdens people were carrying, he was not only talking about religious rules. He was speaking about this inner weight created by the ego when it believes everything depends on it. The ego has to fight to exist, to assert itself, to feel safe. That is why the contrast is so powerful when Jesus says his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Not because life becomes easy, but because the relationship with life changes. It is no longer a constant battle to prove something. The more a person fights to make life work, the farther they feel from peace. This creates an emotional tension that is hard to explain. On the outside, they may be moving forward, achieving things, being admired. On the inside, there is a strange emptiness, as if nothing were ever enough. Peace always seems conditional on something that has not arrived yet, and when it does arrive, it does not last, because another goal, another problem, another fight quickly takes its place. This is one of the great paradoxes of modern life. Never before has there been so much information, so many tools, so many possibilities, and never before have so many people felt so deeply exhausted inside. Constant struggle creates the illusion of strength, but it slowly drains sensitivity, inner listening, and the ability to feel direction. A person becomes so used to pushing that they forget what it feels like to walk without resistance. Maybe you recognize yourself in this. Maybe not in an extreme way, but in small daily gestures. The difficulty of relaxing, the mind that never turns off, the feeling that if you are not in control, something bad will happen. All of these are signs that the struggle has stopped being a conscious action and has become an identity. And when that happens, something essential is lost: trust. Jesus never taught his followers to live in constant tension. He spoke about observing the lilies of the field, trusting daily provision, not living anxiously about tomorrow. This was not an invitation to irresponsibility, but to a different kind of strength. A strength that does not come from control, but from trust. A strength that does not push life, but walks with it. Understanding that struggle has become an identity is uncomfortable because it touches something deep. It touches the fear of letting go and discovering who you are without that armor. Because when the struggle disappears, a quiet question arises. If I am not fighting, who am I? It is exactly at this point that many people automatically return to control without realizing it. And that is where one of the most common and least talked about inner mistakes lives: confusing control with strength. That is what we need to look at with courage next. There is a profound difference between inner strength and the need for control. But this difference often goes unnoticed because control disguises itself as courage. From the outside, it looks like determination, responsibility, maturity. On the inside, it almost always comes from fear. Fear of losing, fear of failing, fear of not being enough, fear of being hurt again. Control does not arise because a person trusts themselves too much, but because they trust life too little. Inner strength is quiet. It does not need to prove itself all the time. It holds, endures, and moves through. Control, on the other hand, is loud, anxious, restless. It tries to anticipate everything, fix everything, hold all the pieces at once. A person believes that if they can control enough, they will finally be able to rest. The paradox is that this rest never comes, because control is never satisfied. Control is born where faith cracks. Not necessarily faith in God, but faith in the flow of life, in timing, in the invisible process of things. When something hurts, when a loss happens, when a plan fails, the mind learns a distorted lesson. I can't let this happen again. And so it starts watching everything. People, situations, emotions, thoughts. Everything must be under constant supervision. This shows up very clearly in daily life. Trying to control the future is perhaps the most common form. A person lives projected into tomorrow, imagining scenarios, creating rigid plans, trying to predict every risk, not because they love planning, but because they fear uncertainty. The present becomes just an anxious waiting room. The body is here, but the mind is always ahead, trying to guarantee safety. Controlling people is another subtle trap. The expectation that others will act in a certain way, say certain things, live up to internal images. When that does not happen, frustration, resentment, and pressure appear. The struggle is not just external, it is emotional. The person becomes exhausted trying to shape the world around them to feel safe inside. Even time becomes a target of control. The constant rush, the feeling of being behind, the idea that life should be further along by now, silent comparisons with other people's paths. All of this feeds an invisible fight against the natural rhythm of one's own existence, as if some universal schedule were being missed. Jesus Christ spoke clearly about this when he taught about anxiety. He did not treat anxiety as a simple emotional state, but as a disconnection from trust. Which of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? This question is not rhetorical. It exposes the limits of control. It shows that there are things that simply do not respond to human force. When a person tries to hold everything together, something curious happens. Life begins to slip away. Relationships become tense. Decisions grow confused. The body responds with signs of exhaustion. Not because the person is weak, but because they are using strength in the wrong place. It is like trying to hold water with closed fists. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. Control creates a false sense of power. For a moment, everything seems organized, planned, under command, but underneath there is constant wear and tear. The mind never relaxes. The heart never settles. There is always something that could go wrong, and this permanent vigilance blocks something essential: listening. True strength does not come from anticipating everything, but from responding with presence to what arises. Jesus demonstrated this very clearly. He did not rush. He did not move in panic. He did not react from fear. Even in difficult situations, there was a calm that did not come from the absence of problems, but from trust in something greater than the problem. When he says not to worry about tomorrow, he is not denying responsibility. He is pointing to a different inner place, a place where you do what needs to be done, but do not try to control the outcomes, where you act with awareness, but release the need to guarantee everything. There is a moment, almost imperceptible, when a person confuses faith with control. They say they trust, but they live tense. They say they believe, but they do not rest. They say they surrender, but they keep holding on, and this creates an inner division. One part wants to trust, the other does not allow itself to let go. The more you try to hold life tightly, the heavier it feels. Decisions become harder because everything seems to carry excessive weight. Fear of making mistakes either paralyzes you or pushes you into constant urgency. And you do not realize that it is not the situation itself causing this suffering, but the inner resistance to allowing life to unfold beyond your control. This is a delicate point, because letting go is not something the mind likes to hear. The mind has been trained to believe that control equals survival. So when someone talks about letting go, an automatic defensive reaction appears, as if letting go meant falling, losing, failing. But there is an exact point where holding on causes more damage than releasing, and this point is not theoretical, it is lived. It is felt in the tired body, the overloaded mind, the heart that can no longer find rest even in achievements. It is when a person realizes that despite all the effort, something essential is still out of place. Not because they did not do enough, but because they did too much in the wrong place. There is a precise point where letting go not only changes everything, but reveals something you could never see while you were fighting. And that is what we will talk about now. There is a very common misunderstanding when it comes to stopping the fight. The mind quickly associates it with giving up, withdrawing, or losing interest in life itself. But letting go has nothing to do with becoming passive or indifferent. Letting go is not crossing your arms in the face of problems. It is ending the inner resistance that turns every situation into an emotional battlefield. Stopping the fight does not mean challenges disappear. It means you stop fighting internally with what is already happening. There is a huge difference between acting with awareness and reacting with tension. When inner resistance decreases, something unexpected happens. Clarity begins to emerge, not as an immediate answer to everything, but as a sense of alignment. Things feel less confusing, less heavy, less dramatic. Many people only realize this after a moment of deep exhaustion, when the body can no longer take it, when the mind collapses, when insisting becomes impossible. It is in these moments that, for the first time, a person lets go not by conscious choice, but because there is no energy left to resist. And interestingly, that is when something begins to change. Not outside, but inside. When inner pressure ends, life starts to be seen from a different place. Situations that once seemed unsolvable take on new shapes. Difficult conversations become simpler. Decisions that felt heavy become clearer, not because reality changed, but because perception changed. Struggle distorts perception. Inner rest corrects it. Jesus Christ understood this principle deeply. There are moments in the Gospels when he withdraws, steps away from the crowds, and seeks silence, not because he was escaping his mission, but because he knew that inner alignment was essential to act truthfully. Even he, who walked in full trust, did not live in constant confrontation with the world. There were pauses, silence, retreat. Letting go is exactly this. It is allowing the mind to step down from a permanent state of alert. It is no longer treating life as something that must be conquered. When you let go, you do not lose direction. On the contrary, you regain sensitivity to perceive signs, subtle answers, and the right movements. Struggle creates noise. Letting go creates space. There is an almost physical relief when this happens. The body breathes more easily. The shoulders relax. The heart slows down. It is not euphoria or exaggerated excitement. It is a simple, deep calm that does not depend on everything being resolved. It is as if, for the first time in a long while, you are walking without pushing the ground beneath your feet. This is the moment when something truly changes. Not because you decided to do something grand, but because you stopped resisting what already is. And when resistance falls, life finds paths that were previously blocked by tension. It is in this space that consequences begin to appear in practical and concrete ways, even if quietly. That is what we need to look at now. When the struggle ends, something inside begins to reorganize, almost without you noticing. The mind, once accelerated, starts to have moments of silence. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer dominate everything. The body responds with less tension, less rigidity, fewer alarm signals. Emotions that were previously suppressed or confused begin to settle, as if there were finally space to feel them without fear. This inner change gradually reflects in the outer world, not in spectacular ways, but in real ones. Answers come with more clarity, decisions stop being a burden and become choices, encounters happen at the right time, situations that felt stuck find small movements. None of this comes from force, but from listening. When you stop fighting, you begin to notice what was previously covered by the noise of anxiety. Spiritually, this is an essential point. While a person is fighting, they are constantly talking, asking, demanding, complaining, trying to lead. When the struggle ends, listening begins, and it is in this inner silence that direction reveals itself. But the question almost no one answers is this: how do you live this way in the real world, without automatically returning to the fight? Living without fighting all the time does not mean living without challenges. It means changing how you relate to them day by day. The practice begins in the simplest moments, exactly where the mind tends to go into automatic alert. When anxiety appears, for example, the tendency is to try to solve everything at once, anticipate scenarios, and seek immediate guarantees. Applying letting go here means noticing the anxiety without feeding it, breathing, bringing attention back to the present, and doing only what is within your reach right now. In difficult decisions, the struggle often shows up as urgency, the feeling that choosing wrong will be irreversible. In these moments, living without fighting means accepting that not every decision needs to come from absolute certainty. Many choices become clear when you allow a space of silence before acting. Jesus Christ taught exactly this when he spoke about living one day at a time, not carrying the weight of all tomorrows into today, not turning the future into a constant threat. In emotional conflicts, letting go means stopping the need to win arguments, both internal and external. It means listening more than reacting, feeling before explaining, understanding before defending. This does not make you weak. It makes you present. Presence dissolves many conflicts that struggle only hardens. In everyday life, this new way of living is built through small permissions. Allowing yourself not to have all the answers, allowing yourself to rest without guilt, allowing yourself to trust processes that cannot be rushed. Each time you choose not to enter the automatic struggle, something is retrained inside. The mind learns that it does not need to control everything to be safe. If this message is touching something inside you, this may be a good moment to commit to this change. Subscribing to the channel is not just a technical gesture, but a way of telling yourself that you want to walk with more awareness, more calm, and more depth. If you feel inclined, leave a comment about what resonated most with you so far. Often, putting things into words helps integrate what was felt. And if you know someone who lives exhausted from fighting, someone who carries an invisible weight, sharing this message can be a simple but transformative act. Sometimes all someone needs is to hear that they are not wrong for being tired. As you begin to apply this, something quietly closes inside, not like an abrupt ending, but like a matured understanding. A sense that perhaps life is not asking for more effort, but for more trust. It is with this feeling that we move toward the closing. There is a quiet shift that happens when you stop fighting. It does not announce itself with noise or grand promises. It is felt almost intimately, like walking with less weight on your shoulders. Life continues to bring challenges, encounters, and decisions. But now there is less resistance along the way. You are no longer pushing every step. You are walking. Throughout everything reflected here, you may have realized that the greatest exhaustion never came from the events themselves, but from the way you related to them. the constant attempt to control, anticipate, and guarantee. When this dissolves even partially, something essential reorganizes itself. Trust takes the place of tension. Jesus Christ pointed to this kind of faith, a faith that is not born from extreme effort, but from conscious surrender, a faith that acts when action is needed, but rests when there is nothing more to do. He did not promise a life without difficulties, but he showed a path where the burden does not have to be carried alone, where the heart finds rest even in uncertainty. Imagine your life lived with less inner opposition, with fewer exhausting mental dialogues, with more space to feel, listen, and notice. Imagine waking up without the immediate sense that something is wrong, even if not everything is resolved. That is the difference between fighting against life and walking with it. You may not need to change everything at once. Perhaps the greatest transformation begins with a small inner gesture, a moment of pause, a conscious breath, a decision not to react immediately. It is in these spaces that life begins to move on its own without needing to be pushed all the time. The reflection that remains does not ask for a ready-made answer. It asks for presence. Perhaps the biggest change in your life will not come from something you need to do, but from something you finally allow. If this message made sense to you, liking this video helps more people find this reflection. If you wish, write a word or feeling in the comments that describes the moment you are living right now. And if someone comes to mind as you listen to this, someone who needs to rest from the struggle, sharing may be a simple but profound gesture. Sometimes stopping is not the end of the path. It is the point where everything begins to move differently.